Shalom and welcome to a new live stream from Israel for Fred. Miff is the largest pro-Israel group in Scandinavia, probably in Europe, as a non-religious membership organization. And these days, our membership is growing very fast because so many people want to show their solidarity and support for Israel after the brutal massacre of 7th of October. And joining me tonight in this special interview is David Weinberg. David Weinberg is a columnist in Jerusalem Post and Israel Hayam, and he is also a senior fellow at the Misgav think tank in Israel.
Thank you for having me. It is indeed a sad and unnerving moment for Israel, for Jews everywhere, and for friends of Israel around the world. I thank you, Conrad, and I thank Miff for hosting this conversation, because it is important to me and to all Israelis that people around the world understand what Israel's facing. Israel is facing a genocidal, annihilationist regime on its southern border, a regime that must be destroyed not only for our sake, but for the sake of the region. And the only way to destroy that organization, its terrorist infrastructure, which is embedded, as you know, in a civilian population, purposely so, is the way that the Israel Defense Forces is proceeding. Now, we, of course, appreciate the outpouring of support and sympathy for Israel that we've experienced over the last 10 days, especially in those traumatic first days. But we all knew that much of that sympathy would begin to evaporate with the terrible scenes of devastation in Gaza, which are developing. And we also know, given the choice, we prefer to be condemned than pitied. Or bloodied. I don't think I need, for your listenership, Conrad, to review the terrifying details of what happened here on the Simchat Torah, the October 7th weekend. An a radical Islamic, Iranian-backed terrorist military raped and pillaged its way through Israeli living rooms. Yeah. That's something that we can't tolerate. Jews cannot, again, be powerless or helpless in their own homeland. It's not just that the images of Hamas atrocities are unbearable. We mean it literally. We cannot allow the massacre to define us as a nation, and we can't allow our fellow Israelis to be helpless in such a way.
Before we continue, I just want to again express our support, and I want to show you an encouraging photo. David, look at this. This is from Oslo on Sunday afternoon. Around 1,000 people gathered, demanding that the hostages will be set free, demanding that Hamas will be stopped, showing the support for Israel's right to defend themselves. So. And we had political leaders from 4 parties giving really good speeches. So I hope that can be an encouragement.
It is. Thank you. Israelis want to be loved. We want Western civilization to love us. We want them to appreciate the good that Israel does, its contributions to the world, but we also want our enemies in the Middle East to fear us. So we want love, and we want fear. We want Hezbollah to have a panic attack every time they think of the Israel Defense Forces. We want Iran to shiver when it thinks about a military confrontation with Israel. But here's the problem. Everything that we are going to now need to do to restore that fear is going to inevitably erode some of the love that Israel hopes to get from the West. Everything that we do to guarantee that the Middle East is afraid of Israelis, of these crazy, radical Islamists, ISIS-style, Nazi-style slaughter of Jews. 1,400 Jews in one day. There hasn't been anything like it since the Holocaust. Everything we're going to need to do to guarantee that our enemies once again fear us is going to make people in the West not like us, not love us, because we've been forced to a situation where we're going to have to fight a very difficult war in a heavily populated civilian era. And I can tell you 1,000 times over, and I can give you a 2-hour lecture how Israel goes to extraordinary lengths to avoid civilian casualties on the other side. And yet it won't wash so easily when you see pictures of destruction on television screens. And what's worse is that Hamas is now trying to drag its big sister, the Iranian-backed Hezbollah movement, which has conquered southern Lebanon, into the fighting. Now, Hezbollah has not 5,000 missiles, not 10,000 missiles, but 150,000 precision-guided missiles and rockets, Iranian-supplied or constructed, aimed at every critical infrastructure and civilian site in Israel. And Hezbollah is threatening to expand the conflict, making this a two-front war. And again, Hezbollah's military infrastructure is purposely embedded underneath the mountainous towns and villages of southern Lebanon. And therefore, an Israeli counterattack will inevitably entail overwhelming destruction. And then Hamas is also seeking to drag the other Palestinian factions in the West Bank and Judea and Samaria into the conflict as well, unleashing terrorist cells and so on. So Israel is facing a conflagration of many fronts that will challenge its society and its military, and Israel will need the support, the material, and spiritual support of many friends around the world. What I'm telling you is that there's a long haul ahead. This is not going to be a short conflict.
You have been speaking in lectures for many years that Israel is winning. And in a minute, I will ask you again, is Israel winning? But first, in this conflict, you are also a father. You are probably an uncle, friend of many young men that have been drafted now to the IDF. How do you deal with that, and what can you say to our listeners about that?
So I'm going to connect the two parts of your question to give you a one clear answer. Israel has been winning and will continue to win in grand strategic perspective because of the strength of its society, because of its moral integrity, its belief in the rightness and morality of its path. And you've seen that here. Israelis are flying in from all over the world, returning home to join reserve army units, to volunteer to fight the enemy, even if they don't have to. Activists have, NGOs and community organizations have come together in thousands of support organizations to, in short, the spirit of volunteering and willingness to take on risks is amazing. and the NGO support within Israel for the military is amazing. You're right. I have 4 of my own kids, adult kids, on the battle lines. I have a son on the northern front facing Hezbollah. I have a son on the southern front facing Hamas. I have a son in northern Samaria, adjacent to Jenin, facing the radical Islamist terrorist groups of northern Samaria. And I have a son, my youngest son, who's now in the southern Hebron Hills, southern Judea, also guarding the border area as well as Jewish towns in the southern Hebron Hills. I'm no different than everybody in this country. It's personal. We all serve in the military at one point or other. We send our sons and our grandsons to serve in the military. Unfortunately, my wife and I know several people who were either massacred by Hamas in the early hours of the invasion on October 7th or killed in shootouts with the more than 1,500 Hamas terrorists who marauded across southern Israel. It took 4 or 5 days until they were all located and eliminated. We've gone to Shiva houses of mourning. We've been to 2 funerals. And there are still 500 Israelis dead, killed, whose bodies have not yet been identified by Israeli authorities because they're so badly mutilated or burned. Again, I don't want to get into the atrocities of Hamas, although it's something people need to know and absorb. This is not a normal war. This is literally a war for our homes in mainstream Israel, and therefore, as I said, it's both raw, it's close to home, and yes, it's very personal.
So messages of support and blessings keep streaming in from the viewers. And we also will open for some questions from viewers, so just type it in the comments, please. There is a Norwegian Kurd asking how does Turkey react to this ongoing conflict? Does he still support Hamas and speaking out against Israel? And why is Israel not supporting the Kurds and Iranian opposition more to weaken the Iranian regime?
I thank our listener, for his question. His question relating to the Kurds takes me back to Iranian culpability for this conflict. It's not just that Iran is was deeply involved in Hamas's surprise offensive against Israel, and that it has backed both radical Sunni militias such as Hamas and radical Shiite armies such as Hezbollah against Israel. There is a grand hand of the Iranian octopus that is seeking to strangle Israel. The most recent evidence is Iranian provided satellite maps that the Hamas invaders carried with them, advanced Iranian weaponry that they came with, guerrilla and commando warfare tactics taken from Iran and from Iranian training and guidance. And therefore, there is a broader conflict here. And as I said, this is a war to restore Israeli deterrence. We're not engaged with the Palestinians in a competition for victimhood. Palestinians will always win that competition. The Jewish people ever since the Holocaust, have opted for power. We've opted out of the victimhood competition. And there is a price to pay for that loss of innocence. We have no choice but to own it. And yes, we will have to apply military force to restore our security. Why does that bring me directly to your listener's question about the Kurds? Because the Kurds have been, for many years, the victim of regional power politics. Israel has supported the Kurdish people, both with military advice and assistance over the years, as well as supported the Kurdish drive for independence. But with the Iranians, what's left of Iraq, the Turks, and even the Russians, the big powers in the region all opposing Kurdish independence, they indeed are in a tough place. Iran has allies in the region, such as Turkey and Qatar, where Hamas leadership has been based for years. And if you ask me, what can the international community do in this situation? One of those things is making sure that countries such as Turkey and Qatar no longer serve as supporters and headquarters for the evil Hamas movement.
One of our good volunteers, Knut Willy, asks, have you seen that terrorists from abroad, Islamic terrorists coming from abroad to fight in the attack and the massacre of the 7th of October?
So I'm not aware of that. There are reports that the Iranians are now recruiting radical Islamic volunteers across the region to come help fight the Zionists. We know that there are Iranian Revolutionary Guards based on our northern border in Syria. That's why you hear every once in a while of pinpoint strikes on IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard bases and weapons depots in Syria. And that is something that needs to be watched closely. There's no question the Iranians would love to turn this into another Mujahideen style grand Islamic war against Israel. I'll say something else, which I probably should have said in my initial remarks. Israel's greatest need now is for time. Israel needs diplomatic space from well-meaning leaders around the world, time to conduct its military operations successfully. Now, this is not going to be a 6-day war. We're already on day 10, and it's not going to be a 2-week war either. Israel cannot allow Washington or Ottawa or Oslo to shut down Israeli operations against Hamas anytime soon. And that will be especially true if the conflict expands to the northern front, God forbid. We're talking of a period of 2 to 3 or 4 months of military operations in order to end once and for all Hamas's military threat to Israel. And I might add, hopefully, to free Palestinians in Gaza from the clutches of the Hamas regime. They are no less victims.
But can Israel afford economically to be on war footing for such a long time?
That is an appropriate question. There may be no choice. The harder question is will Israel have the maneuvering room internationally? Will it have the support? Will it be given the time to get the job done? Or will leaders around the world, beginning with President Biden, who arrives in Israel tomorrow on a lightning solidarity visit, will they try to shut down the Israeli military counteroffensive? because the suffering on both sides is too bad for them to bear.
Yeah. What do you think will be the message of President Biden tomorrow?
So President Biden is coming here tomorrow for three reasons. First and foremost is to show solidarity with Israel. I believe that Joe Biden's sympathy for, support for Israel and the Jewish people is genuine and deep-seated. I sense that he is both shocked and outraged by the Hamas massacres and clearly wants Israel to win. I take his support at face value, and I think all Israelis are appreciative of it. That's number one. Second of all, President Biden is coming, and he's sending significant forces on aircraft carriers to this region in order to deter Iran and Hezbollah in particular from broadening the conflict. So he's sending a warning to Israel's foes, who are also America's foes, America's enemies, that they dare not expand the conflict or else. What's that or else? I can't tell you, but the message is there and it's clear and it's important. Third of all, I think we all have to admit that to some degree, President Biden is arriving here in order to restrain Israel somewhat. He is coming, and he's already said this publicly, to speak to the Israeli leadership, to discourage them from reconquering Gaza permanently. He is worried, as I spoke earlier, that this could become not just a local conflict, but a regional conflict and even a global conflict, which will draw in American troops. There are reports that the Iranians are massing troops on the Iran-Iraq border, and of course they're threatening to strike at U.S. personnel, U.S. military personnel in Iraq or in the Arabian Gulf countries. He is here also to put some cuffs on Israel. I don't think that Israel can afford to be cuffed by the administration, and I hope that Israeli leadership will be more attentive to the demands of Israeli security and the demands of the Israeli public than to some of the cautionary messages he may hear from President Biden.
One of our viewers, Arvid, he is himself in Israel at the moment, has been 4 times in the shelters today, together with kids that he is looking after, and he's asking if you have any comments on Hamas and Hezbollah relations to Moscow.
It's an interesting question. I'll say that Israel has been disappointed with the responses of President Putin over the last 10 days to the new situation. Israel has been caught for some time between a hammer and the anvil, between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, maintaining strategic relations with Moscow because the Russian Air Force now sits on our northern border, flying the skies of Syria and peering into every corner of Israel. And on the other hand, fierce Israeli opposition, along with the rest of the Western world, to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And here, Putin, who has his own interests and is probably thrilled that the world is now distracted by Hamas and Israel, so he can continue pounding away at the Ukraine, Putin has not spoken out against the Hamas massacres in the way that Israel might have hoped. We know that the Iranians and Russians are in a increasingly close partnership. The Iranians are supplying weaponry to Putin for the war in Ukraine, most notably and famously unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, attack drones, which the Russians have used extensively against the forces of Ukraine in the Ukraine. And Russia sells as much oil as it possibly can to Iran, and is really not a partner with the West in any way in containing the Iranians. So the Russians continue to play a bad role in the region and a problematic role versus Iran specifically. The only good thing, I guess you could say, is that the Russians are pretty distracted by their own troubles in the Ukraine and don't really have the weight to throw around in this region as they did 50 years ago. It was 50 years to the day from the Yom Kippur War of 1973 to the day that Hamas launched its assault on Israel. And that, of course, is not coincidental. Back then, in the Yom Kippur War, the U.S. and the USSR almost went to nuclear war. They went to what's known as DEFCON 4 in the United States. That is not really the danger here because, as I said, the Russians are otherwise occupied. But the danger of a world war between the U.S. and Iran and its allies exists.
Yeah. Right before we started this live stream, there was some news reports from the Gaza Strip from the Hamas regime claiming that Israel has bombed a hospital in Gaza, and the Norwegian media is then tonight reporting that 500 civilians may have been killed. So several of our viewers are wondering. I don't expect you to have updated information about this, but maybe you could comment in general of how Israel reacts if by accident civilians are injured during their military operations.
So first of all, let me comment on the very specific incident that you just referenced. I heard about it as well before we began this call. And indeed, the initial reports that came from Hamas authorities themselves and the Hamas Ministry of Health were that an Israeli missile strike on a Baptist hospital killed hundreds of people. So now we know that that's not true. Number one, there are no hundreds of people. There may be a dozen or 24 killed, according to the latest reports. Number two, it's almost certainly not an Israeli missile strike or an Israeli airstrike. Yeah. Almost certainly either a Hamas missile that backfired, fired from a launching site immediately adjacent to a civilian hospital. They do that on purpose. Yeah. Or it was a Hamas weapons depot, again, placed immediately adjacent to a hospital so that they can use civilians as human shields against Israel. A Hamas weapons depot that exploded. This is a classic example of propaganda in wartime. And before everybody in the world jumps on Israel and repeats lies like this, these things need to be carefully investigated. Yeah. I hope, indeed, that this was not an Israeli bombardment of any type. But it goes back to the dilemma that we started with. Israel has asked, has ordered, has begged residents of the northern Gaza Strip, including Gaza City, to flee for your lives. because Hamas is taking you hostage. We are coming in. We're going to decimate Hamas and destroy all its military infrastructure. Get out of the way. Save your lives. And we know from reports in the last couple of days that while several 100,000 Palestinians have indeed evacuated from the northern part of the Gaza Strip to the center and south parts of the Gaza Strip, hundreds of thousands of others have been blocked by Hamas from leaving. There are reports of Hamas stealing, confiscating car keys from Palestinians who tried to get into their car and leave. There should be nobody in Gaza City tonight. The Israeli military is coming in. Save your lives. Israel's international community setting up humanitarian corridors, setting up humanitarian arrangements in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. No other army that I know of in world history and certainly in modern history has ever acted this way and given civilian population time to move out of the way, because it's going to become a zone. I'll add something else. Not far away from the site that was apparently struck or hit or exploded tonight is Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, the main hospital in the Gaza Strip. Everybody in the world knows that Hamas military headquarters are in underground bunkers underneath Shifa Hospital, purposely placed there to use the civilians in the hospital as human shields.
Yeah. And Shifa is where the Norwegian doctors, propaganda doctors, are working. They haven't. They are still in Egypt, I hope.
Those
trying to get in.
If you know Norwegians or others who are working there now, tell them to get out. Tell them to leave. Those Hamas command bunkers are coming down. They're going to be blown up, and everybody in them is going to be killed. People in that hospital should evacuate to safer grounds.
Yeah. There was another viewer that is following the news as we speak, and he says that the IDF now says that they did not have any operation in the area, and it was, like you were saying, a missile from Hamas. Because people were questioning what are your sources to what you just explained about the hospital incidents. What are your sources?
Both Israeli military spokesmen as well as independent analysts who know the area and know the scope of Israeli operations, know the precision with which Israel is targeting Hamas sites, and all Israelis understand the importance of doing so. We don't want the world, trying to stop this operation, and therefore Israel is acting carefully. But understand, again, I don't want to be too apologetic. Israel is going to destroy everything connected with Hamas. The homes of Hamas operatives, government offices, warehouses, boats, workshops, ping pong tables, anything related to Hamas is going to be destroyed. Israel fell victim here to the most horrendous terrorist military attack in modern history, certainly in Israel's history, the full scope of which is still being discovered. It's going to respond with full force, not only to restore deterrence versus Hamas, but to decisively crush Hamas and end its rule in Gaza. There's no way to prettify, to make that a pretty picture.
The good thing, David, is that now MIF is reaching not only pro-Israel Norwegians, but as we speak now, it's pouring in with comments from Muslims living in Norway, typing both in English and Norwegian, and kind of defending Hamas and condemning Israel. Is there a special message that you could give to Muslims living in Europe in this on this day?
Dear Muslim brothers, in Israel, in the Middle East, in Europe, and elsewhere, save your souls, save your culture, save your civilization. Ally with the forces of light and truth, and distance yourselves from the forces of destruction, and of evil hatred. There is nothing in either the Jewish or Muslim religions that posits hatred between Jews and Muslims. There's no reason why the state of Israel and its Arab neighbors should not become close partners. In fact, we all know that the process of reconciliation between Israel and major Arab states in this region has driven forward at lightning speed in the last couple of years. I'm referring, of course, to the Abraham Accords, the peace treaties with United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and a relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia that is nearing fruition, nearing completion. It certainly seems that one of the reasons, or the timing of the recent attack by Hamas, is meant to scuttle that. I'm an optimist. I believe that relationship will yet blossom, because the strategic interests that will bring Saudi Arabia and Israel together are stronger than all this noise around. Yeah. But I say to the Muslims in Europe who are writing into you, you're making a mistake. Do not identify with the barbarity of the hordes who mutilated, hacked, raped their way through Israeli living rooms just 10 days ago. That's not the religion you want to be part of. That's not the civilization and culture that you want to be part of. There's no justification for that. We can build together a more secure and prosperous Middle East by drawing on our commonalities, not by identifying with the forces of mayhem, hatred, and destruction.
Yeah. Amen. The 6th of October, I made a long live stream explaining how the normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia was getting along, and then the next morning, this massacre hit. It's terrible that Iran and their terrorist organizations were able to pull it off. David, I will have to let you go. Thanks a lot for joining us. We hope you and your family and all your loved ones will stay safe, and that you will stay strong, and that Israel will win.
We pray indeed for peace across the region. We pray, and I know that you pray along with us, for no more suffering for Palestinians as well as Israelis. But most of all, at this moment, indeed, we pray for Israeli victory. Nothing less is acceptable at this time, and nothing is going to deter the people of Israel from achieving that victory and restoring its security. So thank you for this conversation. Thank you for your expressions of support, not sympathy, because Israelis are not looking for sympathy. As terrible as the massacres have been, we are looking for understanding and support, material as well as spiritual. And it is indeed heartening to know that friends of Israel in the Scandinavian eras are watching, praying, and supporting Israel. So thank you.
Yeah. Justice says, finally, stay safe. Am Israel Chai.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Am Israel Chai.